Hey everyone, welcome to the next episode of the Justus Parrotta 1988 podcast. So, what I wanted to talk about in this particular episode is how to break away from the concept of Verktroya, which is fidelity to the work in the negative sense. So, if the goal is to dismantle the formulative idea of just being objectively too loyal to it, the best way I think is to return to a blueprint model. So, how do we do that? We go back to open notation, so that's things like Couperin's Les Concerts Royaux, which uses flexible instrumentation. In his case, the piece was written so it could be played on harpsichord with violin, flute, oboe, or viola, and the strategy for this piece was to stop writing for specific rigid ensembles, write only the treble and bass part and the continuo, or you could just even write in chord symbols for that matter. And the result is it destroys the idea of a perfect singular realization because the color of the piece changes depending who is in the room. Other option is radical use of osias and alternatives. So what that is osias, which are alternative passages to simplify material. There's a simple and a virtuoso version, and label sections as optional and provide different ways for themes. And the result is the score becomes a menu of choices. A cultist cannot claim there is one pure version, and no purity of thought in terms of trying to pull a Jeremiah, and integrated improvisations, so cadenzas and ornaments. So the strategy for that is leave the blank bars marked cadenza or use symbols for ornamentation that imply a range of speed rather than a fixed rhythm, and have maybe a lead sheet notation for certain sections. And this way it forces the performer to have a musical soul, and if the performer doesn't add anything, the piece sounds unfinished, making this pure score argument irrelevant. This is for concert music. So historical precedent, so Baroque era, thorough bass, figured bass, realized harmonies, improvised ornaments, and filled out our textures. Classical structural blueprint provided improvised cadenzas and adjusted dynamics for the room. Romantic personal guide used rubato and chose between different published versions. Osias, modern total serialism. That means you can't change the rhythm. The pitches have to be played in a certain order. Acted as a human MIDI player to execute exact instructions. How to reclaim the real composer title. The cult claims a real composer doesn't perform. You can get rid of this mentality by proving that a real composer provides the space for performance to this happening, and stop over notating and performing your own variants. So the score is architecture and then ornamentation in the second pass with the da capo aria type material and the osia choice. There's also a blueprint performance guide in implementing the osias and instrumentation for any keyboard or sustaining instrument. Prevents the purity of tone argument. The floating bar and unbarred section with a cluster of notes or something similar forces the performer to choose the rhythm. Optional voicing uses small cue notes for harmonies, allows the performer to thicken or thin texture based on their taste. Okay, when you as a composer perform a piece with this guide, you lead by example. If you play as a different ornamentation in the rehearsal than you do in a concert, you prove that the work is alive. You aren't manipulating the audience. You are interacting with that moment. They also, when I put all these questions into Gemini, one of the other topics was cadenzas. And cadenzas, let me go back and look at that. Cadenzas and structural silence, that is another thing that can help. So I think the issue in this case, in terms of essentially creating reps and being able to add on reps, is going back to room for ornamentation and improvisation is seen as in earlier eras. And it's not specifically a contemporary thing. We often associate improvisation with people like John Cage, or in some cases, Frederick Jevsky with his Les Moutons de Panurge, and Witold Lodosławski with his Venetia games. It's much older than that. So, see you in the next episode, where the next one, that is where I'm going to compare and contrast and discuss which one of the real people, so it's either Marshall Applewhite or Jim Jones, is closer to the You Compose We Perform mentality, and which one of the two is closer to Jeremiah from Grey 17 is Missing. And it's going to be wow. Take care.